now I'd like to invite Francie Anhut, the Executive Director for Community College of Denver, up to the podium to introduce today's speaker.
So we really have a Boulder theme going today. I didn't even know that my former club members were coming down. I'm delighted to welcome Scott Green, who's Boulder Engineering Site Director for Google, to speak to us today about Google. Now, Google actually came to Boulder the way many companies come to Boulder. They acquired a local company, which was called Atlas Software, and made the SketchUp product. And since they came to Boulder, they now have 400 people. I can't even remember how small Atlas was, but Scott was with them, so he was acquired and has risen through the ranks and is now the top guy in Boulder. Some of you may have read that they recently broke ground on a new facility in Boulder. It was somewhat contentious, as many things in Boulder are. But after yesterday's election, you got 4 pragmatists on city council, so it's probably going to be a little different. But they're building a campus there that will ultimately house up to 1,500 employees. Some people would say today that Google is already the largest employer of software engineers in Colorado. Certainly when they build out that facility and grow to that level, they will very definitely be the largest employer. So Scott is a great guy. He went to Iowa State University. He has a wife and 2 daughters, lives in Boulder, and is here to talk about Google and answer your questions. Please welcome Scott Green.
Thanks, Francie. So I thought I'd start by describing the products that we work on in Boulder, at Google Boulder. I'm going to roll through several topics, corporate developments, trends, our new campus, and then open it up for Q&A. I want to make sure that we have enough time for Q&A. Okay? For projects, has anybody heard of Google Drive or Google Docs and spreadsheets? Okay. Yeah, and likely if you have kids in school, they use it a lot. Super high on collaboration. Boulder's role on the project is really large. We acquired a little company, Rightly, back something like 2006, and it had the notion of doing collaborative, well, essentially word processing in a browser. And over time that's evolved to be manage your life in the cloud, access sharing. Sharing is really the strength of Google Docs and spreadsheets. Changes the way people work. Things like coming up with a design proposal or a student project. You can do that. You can interact with your peers remotely, collaborate, edit. These are all things that we've built out in Boulder. We're one of 3 sites that's involved in that. So it's a pretty significant effort in Boulder. I'm part of the payments team. And what the heck is payments with respect to Google? We manage the product revenue flows through Google. So in the case of ads, we're in literally 233 countries and territories. For a while, I was saying countries until I realized there weren't 233 countries. But territories also. So we're pretty much everywhere for ads. If somebody wants to use Google to promote their business, we have made it pretty easy to do so. Google gets about 55% of its revenue internationally. It's a big world out there. It's exciting times for our company in many ways. So it wasn't all that long ago, let's say 5-6 years ago, that we had a wonderful ads business, but that was really our primary line of business. And now we have several lines of business. So you can buy Play apps, you can charge them to your carrier, Docomo. In Tokyo, you don't even have to have a bank necessarily. We're facilitating those interactions in our payments platform. You can do YouTube subscriptions, Google Fiber, which is a different kind of billing method, and we're interacting directly with customers. Google's always had, grew up with a business-to-business set of lines of businesses, and we've evolved to a lot more consumer relationships. So that's an interesting development, certainly in a payments landscape. So our office does, well, it's one of, depends how you want to count it. We have San Francisco, Mountain View, and Boulder doing payments for Google associated with product revenue. We have a geo team, and some of those folks are really part of the acquisition that Francie talked about. And we're these days working mostly on 3D and metadata, data about places, in particular if it involves elevation, the third dimension, so to speak. We have Google Now. Does anybody know what Google Now is? Maybe not. You probably have interacted with it if you have an Android phone. So if you press on the home key, you can get a set of things that we think might be useful to you, or you can get notifications. An example, when we had the flood, September 2011, you know, the alarms that went off on your phone, if you have an Android phone, that was all infrastructure that Google Now brings, which is, that was exciting. So the notion is we don't want to just wait for you to ask Google things. There's a whole lot of information, knowing location, knowing your interests, knowing what's going on in the world, and pushing that out to you. If you buy tickets in United Airlines and they send an email confirmation, you have to have a Gmail address. We'll parse that email and we'll remind you that you have a flight coming up. This is all, it's interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit about privacy. It's interesting to think about privacy in this context. The corpus of data that we have can be really useful, and it'll also be scary and a challenge for us. We have a small project we've talked about publicly. It's a nascent project, Brillo, which is, does anybody know what an embedded operating system is? Yeah, so things that you don't think of as far as computers, but they have computing power. There's a desire for Google to play in the world of smart devices that aren't your traditional computing platforms. And so we have a little project to work with Chrome OS and Android and build an embedded operating system. And through an acquisition, Francie mentioned that a lot of companies or presence in Boulder start through an acquisition. There was a small company, Revolve, and we being Google, purchased Revolve, and it's part of our Nest organization now, and that's loosely related to our Boulder campus too. We also have a long tail of folks doing important things that aren't associated with product development, from sales, marketing, real estate, people operations, recruiting. So we have a kind of a genetically complete set of folks doing things in our office, but it's principally a product development center. One of the things that, does anybody know about Alphabet? Some people, maybe just a little bit. So Google has grown so much, and it's also interested in doing some things that aren't directly related to ads and search. And over time, it became obvious that the solution wasn't to just wrap them inside of Google and manage them just like search and ads. So something like Nest, sold to consumers, it's a hardware device. It's a fundamentally different line of business than search and ads. And we wanted to free these smaller companies so that they could have more autonomy and get things done. And how many people here have been part of acquisitions, right? Acquisitions are really hard to pull off. We've had a lot of success pulling off 4 people in a garage, doing something similar to what we're doing, rolling up the IP, working together in our monolithic Google area. But something that is completely different, we tended to kind of tell that team what to do and how to do it in probably not helpful ways. And so Alphabet really lets us do some interesting things outside of the corporate Google entity. And so if you can think of it as a holding company, that's exactly what it is. It's a holding company. And Google is just one of the many. And it'll be interesting because it's not your traditional holding company, because we have one very large business and a bunch of fledgling businesses. Larry and Sergey are going to spend a lot of time at the Alphabet level. It's not completely clear to any of us how exactly the paths will go, but it's an interesting development, and the big notion here is scaling the company. I mentioned, challenges for the company. Privacy is the biggest fundamental challenge we have. We work on privacy literally every day on every project. It's, the thing that we want to do is organize the world's information, make it universally accessible and useful. That has privacy implications, right? Even our core mission. And then we're on kind of the bleeding edge of what's right, what's wrong. Sorting through it, certainly legally, the legal system doesn't know what to make of things that didn't exist before and exist now, and there's frameworks and things, but it's evolving. I think that the first order thing that we need to do is focus on what useful things are we trying to accomplish for users, and to give the users control over what we're doing, make it transparent, let them say thanks but no thanks, I want no part of that, make sure that they can get their data out of Google. And I think we've done a pretty good job on that, but we've had our stumbles, drove streets in Germany collecting Wi-Fi information with an just crazy, stupid mistake there. And it's going to be an ongoing challenge because many of our the most significant and useful things we can do, I mentioned Google Now, really involve this corpus of data and helping people predict what's important for them, etc. We have certainly a challenge with European regulators. It's kind of well advertised, and it's above my rank to kind of go into that, but it's definitely a challenge. In mobile, we have a challenge and an opportunity. I think we've done a pretty good job transitioning to mobile, but it's also essentially a scary world. Even though you don't think you click on the ads, you click on the ads. So when people do searches, especially if they have, the beauty of Google is that we can judge your intent, and if you have intent to buy, an ad is really useful at that moment of time. And a lot of, you're sitting back watching ESPN, I'm not sure you have an intent to buy something. You search for even iPhone, buy an iPad, whatever. You have intent, those ads are really useful. In mobile, we have a challenge with respect to just the real estate. It's just a very, very small screen. And an opportunity, because the phones are actually smarter than your computer in a lot of ways. They know where you're at as a starting point. You use them a lot more than you ever use your computer. There's a world of people that are essentially native smartphone users, don't have a desktop. And I think that you see a proliferation of applications. Facebook's done a really super job in this area of identifying, hey, there's some applications that kind of didn't exist that would be Instagram, things like that. Really cool. So it's an opportunity, it's a challenge. We've done some really good things around making it easier for advertisers and marketers to work with our platform across multiple devices, etc. We've have YouTube, and YouTube works really well in mobile. This is a big strength. And we have the Android platform. So we have more people are using Android today than any other operating system. So that's a positive too for us. Exciting trends. Well, first is certainly not a prediction. It's here and now and obvious to everybody, mobile. But it is interesting to watch us kind of move from porting desktop applications to native things. You see stuff like Uber, and you think, wow, it's not that complicated, but it just works so beautifully, and it wouldn't work in a desktop context. So it's exciting to see things grow up in a native mobile sense, kind of as a first order design principle. I mentioned YouTube. The numbers for YouTube and video are staggering if you have teenagers and you're aware of this. We have a proliferation of lines of business that are interesting, from Google Fiber to Nest. I find this interesting because we were such a single line of business, and now we have a bunch of lines of business, and they're not small, like Google for Work, which is part of Drive, sold to enterprises. So if you're a large company, sell on a fairly modest per seat basis. You don't have to manage. You don't have to have IT staff on premise. You don't have to deal with annual renewals that are really high. You can kind of scale as you go. That's a very large business. It wasn't very long ago. It was a small business for us. It was kind of a crazy thing. Actually, it was a consumer-free thing. You're like, how does Google make money on this? And that's evolved and changed, and now not lost on anybody is the shift to cloud, and it's like more obvious that enterprises pretty much everywhere are going to this model. Internet of Things, I'm super excited about that. I actually came from industrial automation background, and Internet of Things is nothing more than what was going on in industry maybe 20 years ago. But literally everything is going to be smart, connected to the internet, and you'll be interacting with it. So think about security, think about your kids coming home, et cetera, cameras, knowing what's going on at your house. Think about like the floods, things that could have happened smartly at your house during that time. Oh, my sump pumps don't work, and alerts and things like that. We lost electricity and energy efficiency. So really exciting things on the Internet of Things. Media, it's a really amazing world in media right now. And like just in the last 3 months, everything that you knew was going to happen, it's like happening. So if you follow like Michael Eisner and his Disney report that scared everybody, this notion that things are going to go over the top that seem like via the internet as opposed to through your cable company, I mean, it's happening. And I think the ecosystem was basically very happy with the status quo, but now that you see that it's going to change, it's just like a land grab. So, companies that were pretty happy being in a cable bundle, they're like, but I'm going to go over the top now. I have to. Content companies are going directly. You also see an interesting thing with Netflix competing with TV and YouTube kind of coming from the bottom up. So, my daughter does a makeup channel, and she makes $100 a month doing her little YouTube thing, and it's, broadcast yourself kind of thing. But those two worlds, Netflix and YouTube, they're fundamentally a very similar space. It's going to be just kind of interesting to see how that transpires over time. Autonomous vehicles, you probably know as much as I do about autonomous vehicles, but it is interesting to think about where we're at, think about the profound implications, insurance, legal, auto companies, how's that going to work? Is it going to be like Sony and iPhones, where you wouldn't, it wasn't that long ago that a set of Japanese electronics companies owned consumer electronics. And then you put the intelligence and the software, Apple first comes to mind, and it's just transformed who's who in that industry. It was interesting to think of that with autos. I literally have no idea how that's going to play out, but it's pretty obvious that there's going to be intelligence in these automobiles, and that the core competencies that are required for auto manufacturing maybe 10 years from now are going to be way different than they are today. Jump over to the new campus. So we have approval to build up to 3,000 square foot campus in Boulder. And if you're familiar with the transit center, people familiar with the transit center? Whole Foods? Yeah, so we're very close to Whole Foods. And so we're going to phase it. We have 2 phases. The first phase we're actually working on now, which is 2 100,000 square foot buildings, each of them capable of housing 500 people. And then a third building, which is part of phase 2, for another 500. One of the things I would want to enforce, and it gets kind of lost, the approval process is for the buildings we're planning to build. Okay? That's the process. But we're not going to go from where we're at staffing-wise to 1,500 with people flying in from all over the country. That's not really what we want to do. We're building this campus for growth. And so we're going to grow in ways that I can't predict. We wanted optionality so we could grow. We literally didn't want to say to ourselves, well, I'm sorry, we can't take this project on, or we can't grow, or we need to move this project because we can't grow. So we didn't want to be locked in that way, and we wanted campus expansion. And Boulder has some interesting characteristics in that you can't just casually grow in Boulder. If you're out in Interlaken, right, I don't think you need to think. There's plenty of, you have options. But when you're in a smaller community, you have to be pretty proactive in having the space. And this has always been an interesting problem for companies in Boulder, and it's led to a lot of companies outgrowing Boulder, so to speak. And so the main point here is campus for growth, what I would call organic growth, but it's, there are going to be things like acquiring a company like Revolve. There's going to be things that we don't expect, and we want to be able to accommodate that in our plans. We picked, pretty excited about this area. It's right by transit. There's interesting things going on with millennials, and they want to be more in an urban setting. They want to ride their bikes to work. They want to take mass transit. We're right off of mass transit. You could live in Wash Park. You can take an express to be within a block of our office, so it feels good that way. You can live in apartments that are being built right in that area right now, just opened up. And we didn't really want to be right in downtown, just because that's a really special place in my opinion. And it felt like this was more of an area suitable for commercial development. In fact, it's been an area that Boulder has targeted for commercial development for quite a while, and for densification. And one of the things that you may not think about, but the whole notion, mass transit works at scale with density, and having places like a Google office next to mass transit makes things work. What's really problematic is multiple hops. So if we were 2 miles from the mass transit, then it doesn't work as well, because you got another 20 minutes of hoo-ha. So that's part of that.